All right, let's bring in now former Prime Minister Scott Morrison. Mr. Morrison, welcome to the program. You are extremely strong in your support of Israel as Prime Minister, and you've shown that support in the past week by visiting synagogues, not for politics, just out of solidarity with Israel and our Jewish community. What's your response, firstly, to the terror attacks in Israel, and also the response that we've seen to it in the streets of Sydney, Australia, with these protests, and in Melbourne?
Well, sure, Sharri. Let's start with the terrible terrorist attacks in Israel first. And as you rightly said, the largest loss of life through the murderous terrorist attacks that we've seen in Israel since the Holocaust itself in a single day. I mean, when you think about that, it's just hard to take that in. And as you try and come to terms with it, and then you start focusing on the barbarity that occurred that you've and others have described in such horrific detail, it's just hard to comprehend it. And what other response can there be to decry it? I mean, we have to be clear that this is a terrorist attack. I said in the Parliament today, to call it even a war adds some sort of legitimacy to Hamas as some sort of combatant. They're not. They are terrorists. Now, in government, we fully listed Hamas as a terrorist organisation, as we did Hezbollah. I made the point in the Parliament today that back in 2018, there was an attempt to pass a motion in the United Nations General Assembly that condemned Hamas for their aggressive and terrorist attacks towards Israel. It lost. Australia certainly voted to decry Hamas. There have been 500 or so motions condemning Israel, but not one in the United Nations that condemned Hamas. The world looked the other way. I mean, the barbarity of Hamas should come as no surprise, and they have inflicted on it in its most awful terror on the innocent civilians. And so there's only one response to that for Israel, and they've been articulating it, and that is to completely remove Hamas from Gaza and to ensure that it has no capability to inflict terror on innocent citizens in Israel. Now, they've been right to try and provide every opportunity, and will continue to, I'm sure, to ensure further innocence. It's not the innocents of Palestine who are the targets of Israel's response. It is Hamas and the terrorists who they are seeking to root out. Now, we've seen, Sharri, a lot of support for Israel this past week, but the real test will be in the weeks ahead. Will we still see that? As Israel takes the steps it should in self-defence to root out Hamas and ensure that it can never do this again? Will they still be supporting? I certainly hope they will. I hope what they're saying today will carry on into the weeks and potentially months ahead. But the reason I reminded everybody of 2018 is I wasn't hearing people say that about Hamas back then. But we certainly were as a government, and always will. It is instinctive. Now, in terms of what's happening here in Australia, well, it's abhorrent. It's abhorrent, and there are laws and rules against that sort of hate speech, and they should be applied. Peter Dutton has made the very good point that people who say these sorts of things, who are here on visas, would never have been given a visa if they'd said those things. That is true.
Do you think they should be
for the Minister for Home Affairs to take action?
Do you think the Minister for Home Affairs should take that action? Do you think people who are here on visas or who are dual citizens should be deported if they are saying anti-Semitic hate speech like "gas the Jews"? If they're here on a visa, then there is absolutely every reason for the Minister for Home Affairs to cancel their visa and to expel them from the country, provided they, the normal tests of evidence and things like that which must apply. But those rules are there for a reason. So, as Ray said, the laws should be enforced. But I think what we also have to ensure is let's not give those with their hate microphone too much amplification. We should decry them and we should deplore them. But let's also reflect on the fact in the past week, the outpouring of support for Israel. Let's reflect on the wonderful strength of the Jewish community that has come together to support each other at a time of just horrific circumstances for them. As I was there at the synagogue on Friday, I was encouraged by the optimism that despite everything that was happened, There they prayed, there they sang, there they read the Torah, there they comforted each other and were encouraged by the strong support they were getting from so many others. I pray that will continue. It must continue because Israel, the people of Israel, innocents in Israel, were under a terrorist attack. And that of itself deserves the condemnation that has followed. And let's just hope people stick with it.
Look, I want to move on to The Voice, but just before we do, what's your assessment on how this could escalate if we see the involvement of Iran and the United States?
Well, you make a very good point about Iran. Let's not forget Iran funds Hamas. Iran funds terrorists. They fund them, they train them and they equip them. Hamas would not have been able to undertake, I believe, these attacks without that support that comes from Iran. And we should be calling on Iran to cease and desist all of that activity, and their very diplomatic relations with Australia and countries like us should be at risk. The US have sent carriers. I'm optimistic that we won't see a broadening of this violence through the actions of other states and potentially of other terrorist groups like Hezbollah. I think and I hope that this will be contained to Israel's response to be able to eradicate Hamas from Gaza. And there needs to be a lot of effort which is placed on, well, what then happens? There needs to be transferred to a credible administration, Palestinian-led, in Gaza. Israel does not wish to occupy in Gaza. I don't believe that's their intention at all. But they can't just let terrorists sit there and lie in wait to strike on Israeli innocents. That's just not an option, and they should be supported to deal with it.
Yeah.